This is the story of one of the last videos I produced with Donut, and it was also one of the most complicated. Somewhere around 10% of my working hours at Donut was spent tracking down cars that we needed for videos. That wasn't why I was hired, I just happened to be good at finding things and convincing people to let us use a car which could be worth 6 or 7 figures.
This Subaru Impreza is worth $300,000 at a price tag of $453,000. This camper costs $1.2 million.
Since I was the de facto car sourcing guy, I was often assigned as a creative lead on any project that needed a lot of vehicles. So the We Drove Every series was kind of one of my babies, and that included driving every Ford F-Series. That's F-150, F-250, etc., all the way up to F-750. So I'm going to tell you how we got each of those and share some insights from behind the scenes. The premise seems pretty simple. Get all the trucks and drive them, but unlike Mr. Beast content,
most iconic racing sports car ever.
Now I'm gonna act like I know why.
It's because of Steve McQueen.
I don't know who that is.
we want the audience to come away from those having learned something genuinely interesting. So the point of the F-Series video was to explain what, from a mechanical and engineering standpoint, has to be changed to make a truck more heavy duty, and then illustrate that with trucks that have been adapted for different types of work. Getting an F-150 is easy. We just rented a truck on and we used maybe more than we should have. Renting a vehicle for a video might violate their terms of service, but if something went wrong with one of those rentals, that's not my dumpster, not my fire. Because if something is so common that you can find one on I wouldn't be the one tracking that down. You don't send a Michelin star chef to microwave an Uncrustable. Like many production studios, Donut was divided into 2 teams, a creative team and a production team. The creative team handles ideation, writing, shooting, and editing the content. The production team handles money, insurance, contracts, feeding people, all the business stuff that makes large-scale production possible. Basically, the production department supports the creative team bringing ideas to life while also reining us in so we don't bankrupt the company. The production team is also the ones who acquire stuff needed by the creative team, so equipment, props, locations, and at most studios, vehicles. But many talented members of production teams aren't super into cars, and that's probably fine if you're making a cop show. The audience won't care if a cop car is a Charger or a Crown Vic, and for some of the vehicles we needed, that was kind of true as well. The exact details of the F-150 for the first segment didn't really matter, so the production team went on sent us a few options and we just picked one. The F-250 was pretty simple too, and the production team also got that one but needed a bit more guidance. We wanted a truck that was hauling horses, and Donut is based in Southern California, and there are a bunch of companies that rent horses for film and television. I knew one of those must be using a Ford Super Duty, an F-250, because if you're really into cars, you know that's a common choice for towing. A typical production person wouldn't necessarily know that, which is why if all you make is automotive content, it makes sense to have someone on the creative team looking for vehicles. But at the time I had a list of something like 20 cars that we needed. Some of those were pretty challenging, like finding something with a 7-cylinder engine, which I did, but remember, this wasn't the bulk of my job. So if it seemed like any of those were going to be slow pitches, I'd pass them on to production. For the F-250, I just asked them to call around until they found a stable who had the right truck and would let us shoot with it. I think it took them maybe 3 phone calls. So we had an F-250 that hauls horses to movie sets and one an F-350 that hauls sick people to hospitals, an ambulance. Again, with a project like this, having a whole bunch of obscure car knowledge is key. I knew that most ambulances are built on Ford's E-Series van chassis, so I knew finding an F-Series ambulance was going to be challenging. And again, I enlisted the production department because this was going to take a lot of phone calls, basically every paramedic company in SoCal. And I explained that when making those calls, they needed to be absolutely certain it was an F-Series truck and not an E-Series van. And eventually, somebody found one and we were good to go. For F-450 and 550, we wanted a party bus and a dump truck. I didn't think either of those would be especially difficult because you can just rent them. So I passed both of those off to the production team with examples of each and some companies where they could rent those. And both of those got screwed up. The party bus ended up being on an E-Class van chassis, so the exact thing we'd been really specific about not getting for the ambulance. By then the video just needed to be done, so the creative team rolled with it and adapted, changing the content to suit that. But it sort of threw off the whole concept of the video. Throwing a van in there was just kind of a jolt. For the 550, we said we wanted a dump truck, and the first thing the production team found was an F550 that was towing a dump trailer. So ultimately, that's just a pickup truck towing something. And again, this throws off the whole concept. But the production team just heard F550 and dump and went with that. They didn't understand that it's what the truck itself can do that matters, and that towing something wasn't pushing things forward. What they eventually ended up with is an F550 with a crane and a flatbed. Now that is actually pretty cool, but visually it's nowhere near as impactful as a dump truck, so it was a bit of a letdown, but it's still better than a van. Which brings me to the F650 and 750. To satisfy our creative ratcheting up, the 650 and 750 needed to be the most exciting trucks in the video. So we decided the 650 should be a fire truck, and the final one, the 750, was a garbage truck. Not because that's inherently more exciting than a fire truck, but because Nolan, the host, loved garbage trucks. As a kid, he dreamed of being a garbage man, and this would be his chance to do that. The energy brought by a host's genuine excitement is enough to elevate any part of a video, so the F750 garbage truck seemed like a fine way to end it. I thought that was going to be a huge pain in the ass to find, but we pretty quickly found one owned by a recycling agency in San Diego, and they were happy to work with us. So the F750 turned out to be easy, unlike the 650. I've left the fire truck for last because that was the hardest one to find. Many fire departments use F-Series trucks as support vehicles. Those basically look like utility trucks with cabinets holding essential equipment like jaws of life, oxygen tanks, axes, and so on. But as any child will recognize, that's not a fire truck. A fire truck needs to have ladders or hoses. It's what's more properly called a firefighting apparatus. We'd worked with several fire departments in the past, so the production team started calling around and no department had one. In fact, none of the departments they contacted even knew of a department that had one, because most firefighting apparatus are built on other commercial truck chassis from International or Freightliner. This is something I knew going into the project, so I knew this one was gonna be tough, and I actually didn't think the production team was gonna be able to find one. But after some cursory searching, I was told by the head of production to hand this entirely off to his team. But he didn't really care about that or about the content. He was just making power grabs to pad his resume. The head of production believed acquiring vehicles should all be done by his department, like it would be at other studios. And he'd been hired because he was best friends with the big boss. They basically just swung on each other's nuts constantly, and any play one made would be backed by the other, whether that was good for Donut or not. The only F-Series fire apparatuses the only ones they could find were thousands of miles from the studio. The travel expense wasn't worth it for a segment that was ultimately just 1/7 of a video, and finding one locally looked like a needle in a haystack. Googling wasn't creating any leads, and they decided it wasn't worth the production team's time to pick up the phone and start calling departments. I'm actually sympathetic to that because there are 1,000 or so fire departments in California. So the production team threw up their hands, said this is impossible, and we'd simply have to choose some other kind of truck that was easier for them to get. This is exactly why we had someone on the creative team tasked with finding hard-to-get vehicles. I wasn't going to give up because I understood how important that fire truck was creatively to the whole project. We couldn't just drop it and pick something else.
Up next might be the wildest truck in this video. It's a purpose-built off-road fire engine built on top of the chassis of a Ford F650.
And I knew we'd just have to get creative to find one, so I took that assignment back. I started with the largest fire department in the state, CAL FIRE, which has about 3,000 vehicles. I emailed and called, but didn't hear back. So I drove to their main equipment facility and just talked to somebody. And they didn't have any Ford apparatus. But they did know of a California manufacturer who built those. The person at CAL FIRE gave me their contact info, so I called and I emailed, but didn't hear back. So I figured I'd just show up there and ask if they had one we could use. And they were actually really excited to see me, but they didn't have one. They did give me the contact info for 2 fire departments in California who had purchased trucks from them recently. I called and emailed them, but didn't hear back. You can probably figure out what I did next. Anyway, after a whole lot of legwork, I managed to speak with the fire chief of a small rural department. I told him what we wanted to do, and he thought it sounded like a great idea. For him, it was a way to showcase the work his mostly volunteer department was doing by showing off one of the crucial pieces of equipment that they use.
This engine was delivered to Grayton in 2020, and its second service call ever was to the LNU Lightning Fires.
That fire encompassed over 350,000 acres.
It's insane. The crew spent 22 days out in the field with this engine, putting those fires out, man.
In return, I said we'd donate to their firefighter fund. And this all happened when I already knew I was leaving Donut, and that segment was shot on my very last day. And the whole process illustrates why I'm glad I left. Even though this was a truck that the production team thought was impossible to get, the head of production still fought me about the donation amount. That was about 1.5% of what the video earned, but to him this tiny amount was an unnecessary expense. He thought that if I was just better at negotiating, we could have avoided it. What he didn't understand is that this wasn't the result of a negotiation. It was us saying thanks to that fire department for working together with us to achieve our creative goal. I think I was good at getting people to let us use amazing cars because I didn't approach that like a business transaction or a negotiation. That's how someone on a production team would think about it, but to a creative, those projects aren't merely transactional. Negotiation is inherently competitive, but creative acts are inherently collaborative. In our case, many of those creative acts were a bunch of car people coming together to make videos with other car people's cool cars. By collaborating on that, we got to show those cool cars to all the other car people in the world, and being part of that felt amazing for me, for the rest of the creative team, and hopefully for the many car owners who helped us do that.